But first of all, I just want to say a very warm welcome to the Pro-Women Importance of Menopause Awareness for All event today. Very timely with it being World Menopause Day today, and it's obviously a really important topic. So we're really happy to have you joining us. In terms of a little bit of housekeeping, we will be recording this session. It's probably better if you'll keep your cameras and microphones off, at least for the presentation part of the session, which will be the first 45 to 50 minutes. Following that, we're going to break off into breakout groups, and we're going to have some confidential, safe, secure space for conversation. That won't be recorded, so it's, as I say, completely confidential. Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand over to our keynote speaker for this morning, Lisa Wright. Lisa's from Menopause the Right Way. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, Rachel. Well, yes, just to reiterate, sort of, I don't know whether to say happy World Menopause Day or not, or whether people class it as a happy experience, I guess really depends upon how it's impacting upon them. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here. I am actually here in sort of damp, sunny Manchester, but I thought I would keep my background to where I've just come back from, which was a sunset in Hawaii. Anyway, so this morning's session, we're going to look at the importance of menopause awareness for all. I was, funnily enough, having a conversation with somebody from Newson Health on Friday, and I feel this is really important because I think to a certain extent, there is still a perception that, you know, menopause is something that impacts upon typically, well, the way the women are represented in the media, sort of white middle class women who are sort of their early 50s. But actually, the reality is that menopause itself touches on everybody's lives, because everybody will have a significant female in their life, whether it be a wife, a work colleague, a partner, a mother, a sister, and so on. So when we were putting the agenda together, we really wanted to sort of stress menopause awareness for everybody and not just women themselves. So if we go, I'd just like to sort of introduce myself a little bit, because I've had quite an interesting journey to get to where I am today in terms of providing menopause education and training. I spent 20 years as the MD of a data company, and that first picture on the left there was me saying goodbye to the corporate world back in June 2019. For me, my 20 years or so had reached the end of the line. There'd been a number of acquisitions of the business that I was involved in, and the final acquisition was by a US listed company. And having gone from sort of having autonomy to do whatever I liked in terms of what was best for the business, then being accountable to 20 American lawyers was not for me for any decision. So I decided that I would leave the corporate world and I would pursue what had been an interest to me for a number of years in terms of exercise and nutrition. So I went to University of Chester. I spent 18 months doing a master's in exercise and nutrition science. And it was really my choice of dissertation that started me on the road of being interested in all things to do with the menopause. When it came to my dissertation, I had to do something that was relevant to my course, something that was of interest to me, and ideally something that was quite topical for the wider population. So I chose to do my dissertation on the impact of menopause symptoms in endurance athletes, triathletes, ultra runners, marathoners, essentially anybody who got involved in a sporting discipline that would take longer than 3 hours. As part of the research for that dissertation, it led me to look, research, read, learn everything I possibly could about the menopause. And it became very apparent to me that there was a lot of misleading information out on the internet. There was also a lot of sort of myths around certain aspects of the menopause. And that then led to me going and getting further training via the International Menopause Society and also via Newsom Health Menopause Society. And I sort of fell into this business pretty much about a year ago when I was asked to deliver a glossary and some training documentation for, funnily enough, my former employer, who'd appointed a menopause champion who didn't really know where to start and got in touch with me and asked for some help. So it's been quite an interesting journey to where I am today. It's one that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I've now become completely and utterly passionate about the menopause and supporting women through that journey and helping educate not just women, but employers, men, partners, everybody, in terms of improving their awareness and understanding of menopause and the impact of that on people's lives. So in terms of the agenda that we have today, we wanted to sort of clear up and sort of clarify some issues around perimenopause and menopause in terms of terminology. We wanted to put a little bit of context around, why individuals go through the perimenopause and the menopause. I also wanted to touch on different types of menopause, because this ties in with what I said earlier in terms of, menopause itself is not just applicable to women in their late 40s and early 50s. There are other scenarios and other examples where menopause will occur, and it can impact on women of all ages. I wanted to touch on the range and diversity of symptoms, because I think, again, there is a little bit of awareness of certain symptoms, but not necessarily the whole full range of potential symptoms that a woman can have affect her. We wanted to look a little bit more about why we should all care about the menopause. And then we wanted to go on to talk about the business impact of menopause on the employees and on the organisation itself in terms of operational perspective and also sort of financial perspective. We wanted to touch a little bit on how businesses can become menopause friendly. And that is a progressive journey that evolves over time. And we wanted to, again, look at the personal impact of menopause on you directly, if this is a stage in your life that you're going through, and then on others around you. And I go back to sort of significant others, family members, etc. We wanted to touch a little bit on how you can provide support for your partners or family members, and also in terms of supporting colleagues. We've left some time at the end in terms of questions and discussion. And then obviously we've got the breakout rooms where we will split you all off into. We have some questions to give you to work through and discuss within those breakout rooms. So that's our agenda for this morning, and we'll get cracking and move through. So I think the first thing that I wanted to do was really just clarify the terminology around menopause and perimenopause, because they do seem to be used as interchangeable words, and that's not just within sort of medical setting, but also very much within the media, and also in sort of general conversation between individuals themselves when they're discussing sort of menopause. So if we start with perimenopause, this is actually the transition time between an individual experiencing menopause symptoms for the first time and, when from that point until the point at which a woman's periods actually completely stop. So, this period of time, in effect, can begin anywhere between the ages of 36 and 49. And that's often a statistic that can quite surprise younger women, particularly when you say to them that, you know, you can start as early as 36 with perimenopausal symptoms. They may be mild, it may be the only odd one or two, but it can actually be in as early as that. Now, perimenopause itself can last, if you are unlucky, for up to 10 years. But for most women, the symptoms that they experience before reaching menopause are typically between 4 and 5 years. Now, obviously, you do get the exception to the rule, and I know of a number of friends who pretty much breezed through perimenopause. It was over within a few months, if not, you know, at most a year. They didn't really suffer with many symptoms, and you know, everything was great. And I talk to them now, and they sort of say, well, I don't, you know, for me, menopause was very, very easy. But, you know, I think those women, certainly from the anecdotal evidence that I see speaking to different groups of women, and certainly from the sort of academic research that's out there and the evidence gathered by the likes of Newsom Health, that tends to be women in the minority rather than the majority that go through perimenopause and menopause without, you know, with minimal impact to their lives. The typical age for the perimenopausal transition to begin in Western Caucasian women is 47.5 years of age. So you can see it's something that can begin as early as 36, but on average it hits around sort of 47.5. Now, in terms of menopause itself, this actually clinically is only actually 1 day. It's technically when a woman has gone 12 months and 1 day without a period. That is actually the point that you are in menopause. And once you get to 12 months and 2 days, you've in effect become post-menopausal. But strangely enough, again, in terms of media and within a lot of the sort of information produced around menopause, we tend to see only perimenopause and menopause used as the terms to describe this sort of transition and then the point after the perimenopause. In terms of the average age of menopause, again, a natural menopause, at the moment, the statistics are showing that, again, for sort of Western Caucasian women, the average age is 51. But a natural menopause can happen anywhere between the age of 45 and 55 years of age. Again, there are exceptions where it can be a little bit older. But, you know, if you fall into the category of going through menopause between the age of 40 and 45, it's actually deemed to be an early natural menopause. So, as I say, just really wanted to sort of clarify some of the terminology around perimenopause and menopause, because it is used interchangeably, and sort of demonstrate sort of the average age that, you know, women typically go through the transition and reach menopause itself. So, you know, in simple terms, why do we go through the perimenopause and end up sort of menopausal? Well, in essence, it's all about hormones, and in particular, we do actually have three, as women, we do actually have three sex hormones. We have estrogen, progesterone, and we also have testosterone in much smaller amounts than men, but it is our third sex hormone. So just to talk about the two particular hormones, in terms of estrogen, this is one of the biggest, well, estrogen itself is the biggest influencer of the perimenopausal symptoms that women experience. And one of the reasons there are such a diverse range of symptoms is that estrogen receptors are actually in every major organ of the body. So when we think about that, it's not surprising really that the range of perimenopausal symptoms are so diverse. If estrogen receptors are in every organ of your body, then if estrogen levels are fluctuating, it's really no surprise that this is going to have a knock-on effect. So in terms of estrogen and its role within your body, obviously it plays a key part in regulating your monthly menstrual cycle. It also does play an important role in pregnancy, but actually pregnancy itself is more dependent upon progesterone as the sex hormone rather than estrogen. But the 3 points at the bottom of this slide here, I think, are the ones that typically surprise most people when you talk to them about estrogen. Estrogen itself helps keep cholesterol in and under control. And that's one of the reasons why in terms of a leading killer of women, coronary heart disease becomes the leading killer of postmenopausal women. And it is because of those estrogen levels and their influence on keeping cholesterol under control within your arteries, and obviously the impact upon your overall cardiovascular system itself. It plays a key role in supporting bone health. In terms of bone density, we all reach our maximum bone density at the age of 30. And after that, our levels of calcium and bone density themselves start to decrease. When you get to menopause, there is a significant decrease in terms of those sort of levels of calcium and bone density. And again, that is related to the sort of estrogen element and the role that estrogen plays in supporting your bone health. And last but not least, estrogen itself does aid cognitive function. So again, when we think about that, and we think about one of the sort of most commonly experienced perimenopause symptoms in terms of brain fog, and sort of changes, psychological changes in terms of perhaps low mood, anxiety, it becomes very clear that if our estrogen levels are fluctuating and ultimately dropping, as we'll see in the next slide, again, quite clear how there is a connection between estrogen levels and cognitive brain health. In terms of progesterone, well, this is the sex hormone, as I mentioned, that plays a significant part in puberty in terms of moving a young girl through from childhood into adulthood in terms of aiding with breast development at puberty, and then also plays a significant part in preparing a woman's body for pregnancy by way of preparing the lining of the uterus for any potential pregnancy each month, and then obviously being one of the key hormones for supporting the woman during her actual pregnancy itself. Now, testosterone, we tend to associate with being the key sex hormone within men. Women do have testosterone. It's to a much lower level than estrogen and progesterone, but it does play a key role in estrogen production. And within women, it contributes towards libido. And there is evidence, growing evidence to show that it actually helps maintain bone and muscle mass along with estrogen. So those are the three key sort of sex hormones that are playing a role in our perimenopause and menopausal journey. I think for me, this slide illustrates really well what's going on for us as women when we reach that perimenopausal stage. So if we look at the levels of estrogen and progesterone we have within our bodies before we reach the perimenopause, it's at a relatively high level, and it's fairly constant in terms of the levels that your body is producing. But you can see that when we enter perimenopause, the levels of progesterone itself actually just decrease, but on a fairly steady continuum until they sort of flatline once you reach actually the end of perimenopause. But these massive fluctuations in estrogen are one of the reasons why we experience or can experience quite a dramatic change and range of symptoms as we go through perimenopause. And what's interesting about this is it isn't even cyclical in terms of matching your monthly cycle. Your levels of estrogen can actually vary pretty significantly throughout the course of a day. And this is one of the reasons why, if you go to talk to your GP, the NICE guidelines released in 2015 said that unless there are certain circumstances that an individual meets, there is little point in testing blood levels to determine perimenopausal status. There are a couple of exceptions, primarily because if you were to do a blood test in the morning and then repeat the blood test late in the afternoon, the levels of estrogen of a woman would be vastly variable. So I think this slide really nicely sort of sums up what's going on for us and why, as women during the perimenopause phase, throughout the course of a given day, we can feel so different in terms of, you know, our emotions, our symptoms. And this really comes down to the fact that our hormones, particularly estrogen itself, are so variable. There is another hormone that does play a role. It's follicle stimulating hormone, and this hormone it really is created in the ovaries, and it plays a key role in terms of helping you go through that monthly cycle. But it's less of an influence on the perimenopausal symptoms that we experience than, say, estrogen or progesterone. Now, I did mention at the beginning that there are different types of menopause other than natural menopause that women can go through. And I just want to touch a little bit on these, really to sort of bring it to the forefront of everybody's mind that, you know, it isn't just something that impacts upon women in their late 40s and late 50s. So the first scenario where menopause can be brought on is in the case of premature ovarian insufficiency. And this particular situation can impact upon teenagers, it can impact upon women in their 20s, it can impact upon women in their 30s. And in essence, this is where a woman has compromised ovarian function, i.e., for whatever reason, their ovaries are no longer producing normal levels of estrogen relative to where they are in terms of their age. So this can actually lead to a regular or a complete cessation of periods. And obviously, if that happens, well, if either happens, it can start to bring about perimenopausal symptoms because those levels of estrogen are not where they should be. And again, maybe on the course of going into POI, the estrogen levels are dropping off significantly. So again, I think the statistic of this was something like 1 in 1,000 women actually suffer from POI. So again, just highlighting that, you know, being aware of menopausal symptoms isn't something that's, you know, solely applicable to women in their 40s, 50s and upwards. It really is something that we should be educating our younger women on, should they unfortunately fall into the category of having POI. So the second scenario where menopause can come on is in a sort of surgical or medical circumstances. Again, this can happen at any age. It can be as a result of a full or partial hysterectomy, or it can be as a result of an oophorectomy, which is where a woman has her ovaries removed. Pretty much, if you go through a hysterectomy, full or partial, or an oophorectomy, you will move pretty much immediately into menopause. Again, that could be something that happens for a variety of medical reasons. And again, it's something that could happen at any age. And we don't necessarily know that this is going to happen to us until we find ourselves in that unfortunate situation. The other scenario is typically around anybody who's having treatment for typically a female-related cancer. So ovarian, uterine, if there is treatment or if treatment includes radiotherapy or chemotherapy, as that course of treatment typically progresses, the woman will be put into an early menopause. And that can actually be something that very often gets overlooked when clinicians are talking to the woman themselves, specifically about the cancer, the outcomes, the potential treatments. I know I have a friend who has a 21-year-old granddaughter who had bone cancer in her femur bone, was given a full diagnosis, was given a full schedule of treatment, was taken through that treatment, but unfortunately was not told that she would go straight into menopause. And that actually, as you can imagine, 21 years of age was somewhat of a shock and quite difficult for her to actually cope with. The final case in terms of surgical or medical menopause quite often will involve trans people. In terms of trans women or trans men, they will inevitably be on hormone therapy. And as with any sort of hormone therapy, if they have to come off that for any medical intervention, or if in the case of trans men, they don't have their ovaries removed, then they themselves will experience a degree of menopausal symptoms based upon their original birth sex and the treatments that they're going through or having. And then last but not least, I want to touch on endometriosis. This is a condition that, depending upon the statistics you read, I've read 1 in 100. I was with somebody on Friday who mentioned his fiance had endometriosis, and she was told that 1 in 6 women suffer from this. And this is a condition, in essence, where the cells that are very similar to the one that line the womb, as in the uterus, are actually found to be growing elsewhere in the body. And that could be anywhere in terms of typically within the stomach, but anywhere within the body. What that actually means is as the woman goes through her monthly cycle, as the lining of the womb is shed itself, the way the cells in the womb react is exactly the same as the way that those cells that are formed elsewhere in the body react. So it can be a very painful condition. It can result in incredibly heavy periods, which quite often the women just assume is normal because it is quite difficult to diagnose endometriosis. And it's also something typically that women have for a long time before they get that diagnosis. In terms of the treatments available, they are usually medication or surgical, and surgical treatments very often result in a hysterectomy, a full or a partial, or again, a nephrectomy. And that, as I mentioned earlier, can result in an immediate push into menopause, or depending upon the extent of the surgery, can bring about a premature menopause in its own right. So I think it's quite important to sort of illustrate that there are different types of menopause, and this is why, it can impact upon women of all different ages, and also the transgender community as well. So I just want to really touch on symptoms. Now, if I do a straw poll, typically on these sort of presentations, and I say to people, name me a menopause symptom that you've heard of, the commonest two that come back to me are typically sort of hot flushes and brain fog. But actually, studies have shown that there are up to 42 different symptoms that are associated with perimenopause and menopause itself. Now, I can't fit all 42 on here in terms of pictures, but I went for some of the ones that I thought women would most commonly recognise in terms of sort of migraine. If you've been a migraine sufferer, historically and you go through perimenopause, there is a significant chance that your migraines will become longer and more frequent. We touched on brain fog, increased belly fat, particularly around the lower abdomen here. We've got irritability, we've got stress, we've got irregular cycles and periods. We've got increased level of urinary tract infections. We've got overall exhaustion. We've got anger and irritation, increased level of heartburn, insomnia, insomnia caused by sort of night sweats or just general insomnia if night sweats aren't something that you're suffering from. And then dry eyes, which is quite a common one, but actually not necessarily historically associated with perimenopause. And I think, the important thing, again, for me is actually ensuring that, women are aware of the extent of the range of different symptoms that could be associated with the perimenopause. Now, as I mentioned, not all women are going to suffer all 42 symptoms, and some women may start with a couple of symptoms, and as their perimenopause progresses, a few more may well appear. Some women's symptoms may start as mild and become progressively worse, and some women's mild symptoms may stay mild and they may have a relatively easy path through perimenopause and into menopause. But I think, one of the key things here is actually being aware of the diversity of symptoms so that, you're not just left wondering what on earth is going on in terms of, am I losing my mind? Am I forgetting things? And it's down to pressure of work or, early onset of dementia. So I think one of the things that's really important, as I say, is awareness of the whole range of symptoms so that women can start tracking those symptoms. And, by tracking those symptoms, you're able to sort of create a picture as to where you are on your perimenopausal journey. And it will also support you in terms of having those symptoms tracked if you decide to pursue medical intervention to help you with those symptoms. So one of the things I wanted to sort of, again, touch on is on top of what we've already talked about in terms of different age ranges of women caring about their menopause, is why the sort of wider society should care about menopause. And I'm just going to put the two statistics up that we started with in terms of average age of perimenopause and average age of menopause and the age range of which both of those two events can occur. And then I want to pull up this first statistic. So I haven't looked at the breakdown of our participants today on the session, but in terms of the numbers of, or the percentage of women that make up the UK population, we are actually in the ascendancy. And at the moment, we represent 51% of the total UK population, which is about 30.4 million women. Obviously, in terms of, every woman is going to go through the perimenopause and the menopause at some point in their life if they haven't already been through that journey. So we can see straight away for any of our male attendees, this is a problem. This is going to affect, at the moment, the majority of the population. Now, in the UK, according to a statistic released by the World Bank earlier at the beginning of this year, we have at the moment about 15.5 million women employed. Now, that might be working full-time, working part-time, working as contractors or 0 hours contracts, etc. And in terms of the total population of employed UK, women represent about 47.6%. So obviously, the majority of the employees in the UK are men, but women do make up not much short of half of all employees. What we need to look at now is the representation of perimenopausal and menopausal women within our UK female workforce. Now, obviously, it's going to vary sector by sector. It's going to vary significantly company by company. But if we take the UK as a whole, we currently have 5.3 million women employed who are aged between 35 and 49. So that is a pretty significant number who, in effect, are either imminently about to start their perimenopausal journey or who have already started their perimenopausal journey. When we then factor in the number of women employed over the age of 50, and this is actually the demographic or the age group that is returning to work in the greatest levels at the moment, we have another 4.5 million women. So in total, we have 9.8 million women employed in UK PLC or UK Limited who are either of perimenopausal age or are themselves menopausal. So whichever way you look at it, as an employer, you are going to have to take into account the fact that the dynamic of the UK workforce is such that you will have a significant percentage of your workforce that is either perimenopausal or will become menopausal within the next few years. So again, really enforcing why, from an organizational standpoint, this isn't something that we can, put our heads in the sand and just sort of think we'll deal with it later. We already have a significant proportion of employed UK women who are on that journey or who have been through that journey. Now, I just want to pull up some statistics that were the results of a survey that Newsom Health did in October 2021. There has been a lot in the last couple of years, I'm pleased to say, in regard to, educating businesses and organizations about the impact of the menopause on its employees. But this is one of the most recent surveys that, as I say, was carried out in around this time last year by Newsom Health. And they surveyed about just under 4,000 women aged between, I think it was 45 and 55. And they wanted to sort of determine the potential business impact of the perimenopausal symptoms that employees were experiencing. And I think the most surprising, well, rather actually, it's unsurprising really, given the sort of anecdotal evidence that I've seen as I've been involved more talking to organizations about the menopause, is that 99% of those women that they surveyed replied that the perimenopausal or menopausal symptoms that they had experienced had negatively impacted upon their work. And in terms of whether they were asked whether they were significant, insignificant, or, neither insignificant or significant. And over a third of the women came back and said that the symptoms they'd experienced had a significant impact on their ability to do their jobs and work within their work environment. So one of the things they did next was ask them about whether they had taken time off to actually cope with their menopause symptoms. And again here, over half of those women, 59%, said that they had to take time off as a result of the perimenopausal symptoms that they were experiencing. But what was really staggering when they explored this further was that 18% of the women surveyed had been off for more than 8 weeks. Now, inevitably, any long-term absence has an impact upon an organization, and we'll touch on that shortly. But that is a significant period of time for a woman to be away from work as a direct result of different symptoms that they are experiencing through their perimenopause. And I think what was the saddest statistic to come out of this survey was that 50% of the women they surveyed had either resigned to perhaps avoid long-term disciplinary consequences of their absence, or had taken early retirement simply because they felt they couldn't continue to work, or wanted to, again, avoid any sort of disciplinary impact of being absent for such a prolonged period of time. Newsom Health went on to explore the reasons for the time off. 45% had referenced reduced efficiencies. By that, statements such as sort of my ability to concentrate, my ability to focus on the task in hand, my ability to be able to do tasks that I'd previously been doing without sort of any issue whatsoever. So 45% had felt that they just weren't anywhere near as efficient as they had previously been. 26% actually felt that the perimenopausal symptoms were actually causing them to have a reduced quality of work that they were producing. And 7% had felt that their concentration, primarily down to perhaps lack of sleep or anxiety, had sort of actually resulted in sort of, poor concentration being the reason for their absence from work. The overall impact of sort of, taking time off and reasons for time off and the symptoms was that 21% of the women felt that they, wouldn't put themselves forward for a promotion, or actively sought to change their role to a less stressful role. 19% of women reduced their hours, so maybe going from full-time to part-time, or increase their working from home to give them more flexibility around handling and managing their symptoms. And at 12% actually sort of resigned directly. So a survey, as I say, that sort of looked directly at the business impact from the employee's perspective in terms of the symptoms that they were experiencing. Now, just to sort of follow that through in terms of the sort of operational impact of the menopause. Now, those surveys clearly showed a decreasing level of performance. And, obviously, the business impact, the operational impact, and the financial impact of the menopause on a business will vary significantly based upon the proportion of women employed by that organization and the roles that those women have. But, if we're looking at decreased performance of those female employees, that's going to have a knock-on effect across the business. If we're looking at increased absences, in terms of continuity planning and being able to sort of deliver on an organisation's primary objectives, if you've got key members of your team away, that can obviously increase pressure on other team members, and it becomes hard for that organisation to continue to be able to operate at 100% if it does have its female employees in and out of the office on a fairly regular basis. Ultimately, whether it be through the disciplinary process that organisations may feel they have to implement as a result of an individual's increased absences. And again, what we have to remember here is many women don't talk necessarily to their managers about the fact they are struggling with their perimenopausal symptoms, and that's leading them to have increased absences. So, the survey clearly illustrates that women are resigning rather than perhaps face disciplinary procedures, or they're not discussing their reasons for their absences and they're being taken down a disciplinary procedure, ultimately potentially resulting in dismissal. So, you know, from an operational standpoint, these are all factors that come into play and will ultimately impact upon that business and its ability to carry forward its strategy and its main business operations. If we look at the sort of financial cost of the menopause, again, this was ties in with the losing of female members of staff. You know, it's very typical. Your menopausal females quite often are longer serving females. They bring with them a wealth of life experience. They quite often bring with them a wealth of job and organizational experience. And if, you know, you're losing that from your workforce, in terms of the actual cost of replacing those individuals, there was a survey done by Oxford Economics in 2014 that actually placed the cost of replacing an employee, and that's not necessarily a senior employee, at around £30,000 to the organisation. And that cost results in losing the existing member of staff and their knowledge walking out of the door. B, advertising and following through on the recruitment process in terms of your HR department, your interviews, your managerial interviews that, you know, come into play after maybe HR have done the sort of first round of interviews. The actual cost of recruiting and replacing that employee and their benefits, and then the 6 to 9 months that it would typically take on average for a replacement employee to get up to speed with the role that they are doing as compared with the employee that has left. So in terms of the financial costs, there is clearly a potential financial cost to any organisation that loses its female employees as a direct result of menopause and menopause symptoms. So what can employers do about it? Well, I mean, in terms of sort of high level, sort of 4 ways to look at this. Culture. You know, the culture of a business is really important. And obviously, one of the things that shapes that culture is the leadership and the senior management team. So, you know, one of the key things for organizations and for employers to do is to help their senior leadership embrace and sort of engage with creating a menopause-friendly environment and a menopause-friendly organization. Now, you know, if you get your leadership and senior management team on board, that then leads into actually education and training to raise awareness of menopause and to raise awareness of the symptoms and who may be impacted upon it and what the organisation can actually do to help support any menopausal employees that it actually has. So, you know, awareness means having concerted campaigns around the menopause so that the symptoms and the potential impact on the employees are shared and made aware throughout the wider organisation. It's also important to communicate any menopause initiatives or policies or resources that the company is providing. Again, this could be policy orientated or it could be practically orientated. Simple things like, for example, providing fans for desks if you know the requests are if such things are requested, or putting sanitary products in toilets, for example. In terms of support, good practice, although it's not yet enshrined in employment law, is to put in place a menopause policy. And again, you know, embrace those practical changes and potentially create a sort of support group or menopause champions within the business where other employees can go provide feedback, and that feedback can go to the senior management and the leadership team. You know, a number of organisations I've spoken with actually have a member of the senior leadership who's the menopause champion, and that just is absolutely fabulous and fantastic. But there are other organisations where perhaps a menopausal member of the senior leadership or management team doesn't quite feel comfortable doing that. So whatever support an organisation puts in place, you know, it has to work for the employees, and it also has to work for the organisation itself. Events are a great way to educate staff and employees, whether that be menopause cafes, which are more informal, allowing people to sort of come in, drop in and out, have free discussions, or to sort of have events around the sort of things that I can offer, where they can be tailored at senior management, they can be tailored at managers. But again, you know, embracing menopause, and not just on the 18th of October every year, by providing events will help to really sort of tick all of the other three boxes, in terms of it will help build a menopause friendly culture, it will help build menopause awareness, and it will help menopausal employees to feel supported. Just want to touch on some of the impact here of you know, personal menopause symptoms. And again, I'm conscious I'm running over here, so we'll keep this relatively brief. But I think this is a staggering slide in terms of, you know, the lack of perceived impact that menopause symptoms would have. So, you know, 50% of women said that their symptoms had impacted upon their home life. 50% of women had said that symptoms had impacted upon their sex life. And 36% of women had said that symptoms had impacted upon their social life. So I think what we can draw from this slide is that with an average of 7 symptoms, and symptoms being much worse than women had expected them to be or suspected they might be, it follows through to impact upon all aspects of a woman's life: home, personal in terms of relationships, social life, and clearly work life as well. So, you know, if you're going through the menopause yourself at the moment, you've got those fluctuating hormone levels. Those are going to be creating mood disturbances, and more than likely you'll be experiencing some unfamiliar behaviours, in terms of whether that be anxiety, in low mood, obviously tied in with any physical symptoms that women are experiencing. This can ultimately lead to strained relationships, and that's strained relationships around all areas, in terms of strained relationships with partners, strained relationships with children, other family members, and possibly even strained relationships within the work environment as well. If you're generally just not feeling yourself, and you're not feeling yourself on an ongoing basis, this will have an impact upon all of the relationships that you have in place with different cohorts of family, friends, and work colleagues. So, you know, if you have a family member, or you have a partner that's going through the menopause, and some of these are very much applicable as well to work colleagues, what can you do to help? Well, you can educate yourself in terms of the extent of the symptoms that your partner may be suffering from. You really should look to encourage your partner to speak to a health professional, and potentially offer to go with them. This isn't necessarily something that can easily be fixed by dealing with it on your own. A problem shared is very often a problem halved, and it can obviously help to bring an objective view to what you are actually going through. Communicate openly and ask what your partner needs. Please be patient. Try not to put your partner under any pressure, and obviously show some empathy and be empathetic. You know, if this is your wife or your same-sex partner, then obviously pay them compliments so that they know you still care and find them attractive. And I think one of the key things here is to remember that relationships during menopause can be quite complicated. It isn't necessarily about you, it's about the other person, but it's what you can do to recognize that the other person, the other individual, is going through a period of change in their life and could well be struggling. Those are elements, again, that we follow through in terms of work colleagues. There's just one extra one that I add in here. Again, if you've got work colleagues who are going through the menopause, it's really important that you educate yourself as to how it may be impacting upon them, the range of symptoms, the diversity of those symptoms. Again, be prepared to sort of talk and listen, offer them and be patient with them, offer to help, offer to provide support. But the one key thing within the work environment here that's slightly different from, say, family members is don't assume. Don't necessarily assume that if you have perimenopausal or menopausal team members, that they will want to come to you and tell you all about it if you're their line manager. By all means, if they do, that's great, talk and listens. But, you know, this isn't necessarily something that you as a manager should be the instigator of the conversation. So that's pretty much all we're going to talk about for today. So I'm going to hand back to Rachel, because I apologise now, we've run a little bit over.